They've never dealt with a son who started a podcast and aired out the family history.
I'll cut you off there, but you discussed it. Every family is unique. You did yours, and one was love. Love is such a powerful word.
It's real, it's raw, it's everything that the Alex Perry on Fire podcast is about. Welcome to the Alex Perry on Fire podcast. And today we have our most visited guest, Elliott Perry, my twin.
Thank you, Alex, for introducing me. Usually you give a little bit more insight on who I am, just not your twin. Maybe your competitor in sports, your supporter in life, your travel buddy at times. I could go on. But
Well, I think because you've been on the show a couple times, I hope the audience has watched and seen you in your journey. But if they haven't, yes, the person I came into the world with, the person who has motivated me to be as competitive as possible, at the same time grow with you, and experienced what I would say is the most trying year, but also the most probably rewarding year for both of us as we sit here in the end of the year and kind of reflect a little bit on the podcast.
Agreed. I agreed. It's been an amazing year of growth for us and excited to talk about it.
And we had our parents, my mom, your mom, or my dad, your dad, on the show. And I think the reason why we had them on the show,
our mom and
our mom, excuse me, our mom, our dad, on the show, because it does give the audience a clue of to the way I am, the way you are, the way we're shaped because of your parents and the patterns they bestow on you in this quote unquote inner child time. They're also living this for the first time. And what I mean by that is, I think we have to have compassion, not for just ourselves, but for them, because they've never gone through this before. They've never had kids turn 40. They've never turned 80. They've never dealt with a son who had to go to treatment, or they've never dealt with a son who went and started a podcast and aired out the family history. When I start the questions to my parents, I started with, this is not an attack on you. This is for me to learn. So I'm setting the tone. I am not asking you to change. You may be very set in your ways now and not want to change. I just want to learn and listen so that I can change and that I can grow.
Yeah, and I honestly thought both interviews were excellent, and I from the standpoint of not just listening on the podcast, but understanding how our father grew up, how our mother grew up, the hardships they had that they never talked about. When I first started to do inner child, I had to go back into my memory, and I had to pull out a lot of things that I had dug super deep because they were painful, and I didn't even know I'd done that. I remember I'm forgetting the therapy, timeline therapy, right? And they said, go back to the earliest you can remember. And the earliest I could remember was just one memory at 6. And then what could I remember at 10 and 11? And it was, in terms of digging in deep and how they treated each other and how we grew up and things like that. It was harder in that way because you had to unpack it. And I listened to you interview our mom, and you called her out, which I thought was great. You say something mean about someone or something that's maybe not nice or a character flaw, but then you're right on the back end to say, but this was great, and this was great, and this was great. And that's sort of how I'd say I learned. I won't speak for you, but it was, if there's something bad, you then top it over with 3 things great that buries the bad. And bad is such a vague word, right? Just call it uncomfortable or not usual.
Yeah, you deflect, right? You're like, oh, I don't really like how that came across, or maybe that's not the best way to portray them, even though I feel this way. So I'll deflect with a comment that paints them in a nicer picture.
Yeah, and so unpacking that was hard. I came back and started to talk to our parents, right, about it. I think it started to make them more comfortable to start discussing it. However,
but take a step back, because again, not everyone's heard your episodes. When you came back from what did you have a conversation?
Well, I was in Malibu,
meaning
I was at a place called Seasons for call it rehab. It was mental rehab. It was getting off the stimulants I was taking. It was really getting my mind clear. Um, a lot of it is just sitting with yourself, and it can be super uncomfortable. I used to say it's isolation therapy, even though you're in a house with a lot of other people. But there's so much downtime, and so you're almost forced to dig deeper and deeper and deeper, and it's not fun. When I say fun, it's rewarding, but at first it's extremely difficult because you have buried those things. And in our case, our parents never gave us their childhood. They never gave us, even as they were growing together, what that looked like. Not until we were a certain age where we could form our own opinions and really understand, it wasn't brought up by them, and it still hadn't been.
You mean how they grew up?
Yeah, and just the things I think, and I got to listen as a listener from the podcast when you interviewed our father and mother. It was so eye-opening how you were able to press them and push them to go deep, just like I was, forced or pushed to do at therapy, or seasons in Malibu, where it wasn't comfortable for them. And you could see different things. You see how you took them back to points in their life that weren't great or that were confusing.
What do you think hits you the most from listening? And maybe you answered in two-part, but from mom and dad's episode.
I think sympathy, and I say that in that when I was learning to go to the inner child, and I was at Seasons, again, my rehab spot in Malibu, I felt like a victim, and I felt like what they had put on me pushed me to be how I was at the current moment, and that wasn't fair to them, and it wasn't accurate. It was still real feelings at the time, but I think, and it was so great about you bringing them on individually, because I think that actually opened them up to talk about themselves more and, again, not lie to themselves. But I felt deep sympathy. And I say that because my dad never talked about anything bad, right? Or anything tough in his life. Or, until that podcast, it was the first time we went into depth of how he grew up, what were challenges. And you could hear, how difficult it was for him even to talk about it. You go to my mom's side and it's like, yeah, she opened up about her struggles losing her dad at a young age and um, having a mother that was really, really tough, and, leaving the country and having 4 kids and how much love and support she put there, but also had to be sort of you know, the stern one where my dad got to be the fun one. Um, and so it's just hearing that stuff for the first time is it's so you feel it so much. I felt their words, and again, I think I know I feel closer by them being vulnerable, but also being able to connect, right? And be like, "Okay, this is maybe how you portray things onto us," but not because you wanted to or not because sometimes you didn't even know, just that's all you knew, right? And that's where I said I never felt like I didn't have an amazing upbringing, or I wasn't given, even today, an amazing life. It just helps you understand where it comes from.
And I smiled when you said the word connect because I think you yearned so much for connection. I genuinely think that in you. Um, and I think you saying that even, solidifies that that's really what you wanted. You wanted connection with your mom. You wanted connection with your dad, a deeper level connection. And that's really what you want today. And I think it took a long, long time. And that was the circle back to inner child that you worked so hard on, was to admit to yourself that you yearn for that connection today.
Yeah, and I think, again, when I was at rehab, it was not easy. I mean, I went weeks of them keeping going inner child, and obviously they're experts, right, of breaking down wall after wall after wall of just continuous meetings and making you uncomfortable to finally get to what's the biggest layer, right, or what's the biggest thing, and yeah, connection is huge for me, and I've learned that this year. But yeah, I feel much more connected knowing their true story and even know how they feel right now, as opposed to just putting a rainbow on everything or just saying, what you heard in our mom's podcast of just push on and just push on. And it's like, yes, of course in life you push on, but you want to learn or know where you're at and how to push on the right way, right? And not keep going through the same, I don't want to say mistakes, but just areas where you'd say, I would have done this differently, or I would have given more detail or provided more insight on why. But yeah, I think that's nice. And yeah, it's emotional. It's really emotional because it shows it's not too late, right? And I say I feel so much more that they're trying, right? And they're opening up. And obviously, my dad is a little bit further ahead than my mom, and I only say that because even you said it. He says I love you now, and we go to lunches all the time, and it's much more real, and the connection's so much stronger. Really, not till hearing our mom's podcast did it really hit me for the first time of I do feel sad at times, and I do feel like, he hasn't been given some of the love that others have gotten, which is sad, and she's
That
tough.
a mother-daughter or even a mother-father-daughter, would have gotten. And yeah,
And
I
she
just
also had 4 boys, right? I mean,
yeah,
who doesn't want a
she
girl,
never had
you
a girl
know?
and never yeah, and
And
she wore that on her. She
and she
said I only wanted 4 boys, but we'll never know the truth behind that. She never got that choice. It wasn't a
yeah,
choice.
yeah, so, I mean, things like that, but again, I've never not felt loved by either parent. I hope that
No,
comes
no.
across. It's just in a different way.
I think you answered the question.
You're obviously interviewing them. I don't know if you look back on it, how you sort of saw those interviews.
Well, I would say, the first thing that struck me with my dad's podcast was, I asked him how he felt when he had a very loving family and a mother and a father, and then one day, at age 8, his mother was gone. I asked him that, and he said, "I don't know." And I said, "Okay, well, your mother just left. You don't know how you felt." And he said, "No." And then I said, "Okay, well, I'm going to fast forward 18 months to 2 years. Spent a lot of time with your father. Your mother comes back, takes you away from your father. How did you feel?" And he goes, "I don't know." And I said, "Okay, so you're telling me between 8 and 10, you were torn away from your mother, then torn away from your father, and you don't remember how you feel?" And he said, "Yes." And to me, that just meant that he never coped with it, right? That didn't make sense to me. If he said I was distraught, if I was super sad or I didn't understand, he did say a little bit of he didn't understand. But what I've come to recognize and realize through my journey, through watching you do yours, and a lot of other people who will share with you, the brain is incredible at coping and forgetting trauma. It's our way of pushing through. It's our way of moving through, right? Surviving. And I think he did that. And I don't think he ever really addressed it. And I think that's was pushed onto us as kids. I'm not saying he wasn't a loving father because I genuinely believe he was a loving father. But did he want to talk about his childhood? You just said it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe you're sort of discussing, but what you took away from his interview after you went and listened to it. Again, I always think when you're asking the questions, it's harder to take it in, and maybe, afterwards you listen to the answers. Did you feel like you could relate more to your inner child, or did you feel like you learned what he said and why you might be how you are?
Yeah, I think the work I've done prior to his interview that then led me to asking the questions at his interview. For example, you said it. I never pried into our dad's life. I don't know if that's unusual because I've never been in another place where I have, but I think it's interesting that we've never asked hard questions. What was your father like? What was your mother like? What was your stepfather like? What was it like growing up as Fred Perry's grandson? What was it like being taken away at 8? We're asking these questions at 41 years old. And I think this is my opinion, and it goes back to our mom's interview as well. I think there was some awkwardness of not wanting to bring it up. I think going to mom's, what was it like having no relationship with your mother? What was it like losing your father, who you cannot say any one thing but the greatest things about, how much you adored? We didn't really press. And I don't think we didn't press because we didn't care, because I know for a fact we both care and we care about our family. I think we didn't press because I don't think they wanted to share a lot of that with us. And it kind of reverses and goes back to the point of they didn't share a lot of childhood with us. I think it's interesting that I can sit here right now and say I don't want kids. And for a long time, you now are, on the fence about it. You didn't. I think a lot of that has to do with it is the fact that we didn't see. I'm not complaining. I love where I'm at in this seat. But to say we saw what would be deemed a normal childhood or family experience or hear about that, we didn't. And what that does is affects you. You don't listen.
Well, and you said normal, what I've learned, and I'll cut you off there, but I don't think there's normal is in the eye of the beholder, right? I think that's where I think people get sort of beaten down sometimes or trying to live to a social standard. You discussed it. Every family is unique. They have different dynamics. They have greatness and they have areas of call it where they can improve. So when you say normal, I think, and I'm calling you out there. I just don't think that creates a
No, I
their
appreciate.
accurate
I appreciate it.
description.
Actually, call me out. Call me out. I shouldn't say normal. We are all individually unique and great and perfectly imperfect. So I will. I appreciate that, and I love that, and that's why I say, as I sit here today, I'm not complaining. I wouldn't trade anything for the way I was brought up, for what I've learned, for how I see things right now. The question you asked, and I'll repeat, is from the podcast of our parents. What did I learn? What did I learn about my childhood or my patterns, or what? I think the greater thing, and we're touching on it, is what have they lied to themselves about for the last 20, 40, 60 years? And I think we saw it in the podcast. And that's not to call them out. I think it's the idea that you're never too old to become aware of something and try and fix it. Because I don't think you're just fixing it for yourself. I think you're fixing it for the generations below you. And the pattern breaking to bring that to the forefront and say, maybe I didn't handle this right. Maybe we didn't talk about this. Again, what I would say with my dad is, what didn't we talk about? We didn't really talk about his relationship with his father, with his mother. How about his relationship with himself? Which, again, I appreciate. And the people who have listened to his podcast, they say this guy, he might be the new Modelo man, the most interesting man in the world.
That was Dos Equis.
Well, he could be the new Modelo. Modelo sells more than Dos Equis now.
That's true.
But I think it's funny. We appreciated his kind of craziness, his off the wall. As we got older, we questioned it a little bit more. And we loved our dad, but half the things we said were like, is that true? I don't know if that's true. It was who he was. We appreciate who he is. But again, I think what we're loving about our dad now at his 81 years of age is his willingness to be open and change and say, you know what? I can be honest. He's told me I love you more than I've told him I love him in the last 3 weeks. In fact, sometimes he says it when he probably doesn't need to say it, but I appreciate it because he's listening. And that all he has is time to make things right today. Can't go back a day. I don't think he did us wrong, but he's sure hell showing us that he can say I love you to us.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a little bit this is where I struggled a little bit. I say Malibu seasons where I was at is I wasn't upset about how I was brought up. As you said, like I wouldn't trade it for the world, but you have to dig into why things might not feel accurate for you or why, to follow in the footsteps. And you talked about kids, right? Off of what we saw and even through our parents' podcast, our dad sort of joked of, I didn't want one kid, 2 kids, 2 of you, his eyes roll back in the head. And it's like, I know he doesn't mean that, right? You could also see in the podcast how much he loves us, right? But that wasn't shown. It was the first part, right? And it would be in jest and things of that nature. And or their relationship, my mom and my dad together, they can go at it. They can banter really well. Do they love each other? Absolutely. They wouldn't be with each other for the last, I don't know, 55 years or something like that.
50.
Yeah. If they didn't get to ourselves and the outside world, they don't show that love. I believe they show that love behind doors.
Yeah, and I think it may be an era thing. When mom was in the chair, she has an ability to just, and it was almost contradictory to say, okay, I'm open to new things. At the same time, she said, just keep pushing on. Just keep pushing through. No one wants to hear you complain. No one wants to hear it from you. That was what was taught to me. And at the same time, she's saying, I can change, but she's saying, well, whatever, just push through. What I found fascinating on her episode is that she makes a lot of sacrifices in her life. And she dismisses them because she was born into a privileged lifestyle. And so I still believe this, and I will say this. Mental health does not take a break for privileged people. It does not spare them. Neither does nature. It does not look at where you are, what boat you're on, or what plane, or how you got there and say, I'm going to give you a break, or go around poverty versus wealthy areas. To my knowledge, it doesn't. And the same thing happens in the brain and the mind and the body. And I think people can sometimes be dismissive and say, well, they're extremely wealthy. Why should they have to worry about a thing? Or they came from this. And sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes they lack sympathy, empathy, emotions from very difficult, tough, overworking parents, or push through parents who didn't really give them as much love growing up because they were distracted in work or for some other reason. And I thought Mom was incredibly dismissive of that. And especially to the fact of what she said she gave us. I think that having 4 of your kids leave before the age of 12 to boarding school must be incredibly difficult. I don't like leaving my dogs for 2 weeks.
I'd say like 2 days, but
but and I'm being serious. So that was a sacrifice. I think it's a sacrifice when you have a marriage that isn't working, and you stick together for what you think is the greater benefit of your kids. That's a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice to move homes when your economic lifestyle changes. It's a sacrifice to do other things that I could go on. If you watch the episode, you'd know it. I think part of that gave me a little bit of, I want to say sympathy for her, for the fact that she put all of us first in her life, of being a mother. I genuinely believe that. And I also had a little bit of sadness because I could sense that her family dismissed her and said, oh, you don't need to be good at business. You don't need to work. Oh, stick here in the arts. Oh, you'll be fine. And she makes these comments. And so did our dad. Words will stick with you. Things that people say to you, especially people that care about you, you hold them. And she said a couple comments that, again, she was dismissive about, but were incredibly hurtful comments coming from her mother, probably her brother, arguably her husband. And the truth is, it's all coping. We talked about in the beginning of the episode, how do you cope? How do you move forward? What I want to go back and reverse is we shouldn't just dismiss them. Deal with them. And I think that's what's going back even to inner child, is dealing with the things that are actually affecting you later on in your life.
Yeah, and I think what I've taken from this year is it was very difficult for me to go and look into the inner child, right? And again, even when first 2 weeks, I'm like, I don't feel an inner child. I don't even know who this inner child is. I said, they're like, do you feel him? And I'm like, no, I don't feel him, like, and that's not to say others don't, right? It's just the way I was. For me, it was more of mentally understanding. I think going, and I think this has been true for our family as well as even our friend group, is that opening up, we all have had such privileged lives, and we get to, enjoy our work and our events that we go to and our travel, but it doesn't mean everything is okay. And I say me going, it sort of opened up a little bit of call it the gates for others to be like, it's not perfect, right? And so,
are you talking about when you went to treatment?
Yeah, and I think even coming back and talking about it, when I came back, I would talk about it to my parents. I think that started to open the door, at least, to them saying, and you could still see in their podcast, it wasn't comfortable for them to talk about it. They were uncomfortable doing their best to say it in comfort. And I think sometimes, even in my dad's episode, he comes across sometimes maybe is I don't want to say arrogant or this. He's not that way, right? But I think when you're sitting in front of a microphone and, on camera, it's still hard the very first time you are to really open up because you're giving your truth to anyone who's listening, and it's on there forever. But even more so, our friend group, right? We're all go getters. We're all been very successful in our own rights, and we all portrayed that to each other all the time, right? When we were together, it wasn't that. And I think, especially in the last 6 months, I think again to me, and I would think even to you, certain friends have opened up and said, "Okay, I'm excelling here, but I'm not feeling it here," or I was at here, 3 months ago, and Christopher had been talked about it on your podcast of peaks and valleys, right? And it doesn't matter. You could be here, and if you think you're going to live here, you're going to be really, really in bad shape when you go down here, right? And I think when you're down here, you pull on the memories that you can get up there, and that's where I think a little bit of growth, and we talked about our inner child, is that okay, I'm over the fact of this is what I learned, or at this age, or this is what was portrayed to me. It's much more of my own identity, you know?
Yeah, and I think really what you're talking about is we're very protective of our emotions, our feelings, our outwardness, right? And we hold it. And
And especially as men, and I think you touched on that in a lot of your
well, the
early
masculine
episodes.
side, yeah, tends to hold that back and not share it as much. What I would say and give you credit, and I give also all the guests that we've had on this show, a lot of them, the ability to share not just the good, but the hardships and the things that you're talking about in a way that we can also understand, right? The reason why you talk about it and the way you talk about it is it might really resonate with someone the way you're describing it. You can read 10 books that have the same underlying message, and one of them will hit you because it resonates with you. They all have the same message, but it resonates with you. And I think the fact is, your journey of a 40-year-old who was excelling in business, was making it on his own, and figure out a concoction to keep going, that was actually not working at some point, needed to go get help, realized the way to fix himself, still work on it on the daily, but be real with that the fact is it's not gone. You have to still be mindful of everything, but then also want to help people as a not just a measure to help them, but also keep you honest. It's just a really incredible cycle. And the fact that you're open about it allows people to just be honest with themselves. And I think I said it actually in a couple episodes. I think even Lane has said it. We lie to ourselves. We are the biggest liars to ourselves, and we don't even know it. It's the greatest coping mechanism ever, is the fact that we will hide things that we don't want to be honest with each other. And when we're talking like this, or we talk after a therapy session and share with each other, or we talk to our friends, what we are hopefully doing, or we have a spiritual leader in some way, or just someone we trust, is trying to dig deep and say, look, it's okay to open that wound up. Because if we open the wound up and we talk about it, we give it a chance to heal.
I agree. I agree, and I think again, you said trust, right? When we get off, you trust your therapist. You're in a room where everything's call it not going out of that room. It stays in those four walls. When we talk, obviously, it leaves those four walls. There's still a trust in what we talk about is internal to us, right? And then there's a third piece where you start. I'll be honest. I've talked to friends about some of my therapies, so if I brought them up or not, just to let them know this is what goes on in my therapies. I think some other close friends have started to go to therapy because they have a different connotation of it now, right? Where it's not, oh, I'm going to talk about just bad, 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 bad. No, it's talk about life. It's talk about present. And I'll call you sometimes, even before I did this last week. I'm like, I don't know what I'm talking about. Right? I'm like, feel really good. Everything's, nothing drastic changed in a week. And you said to me, well, in a great way, let's go back to our Thanksgiving Friends episode. And why don't you think about where you were at last year to this year and where you want to be next year, right? And I was like, that's a great starting point, right? And so I actually used that as I went in of being like, and then that opened up a lot of different doors as we went through the sessions. Um, so I think again, yeah, it's it's trust, right? And I think the biggest thing, um, just around people you care about and love is trust.
Well, and I think the idea is when someone sees you putting in the work, they're going to trust you, right? If you hadn't put in the work and gone to treatment and gone to therapy and been vulnerable, you don't have a lot of credibility. And that's no offense
No,
because it doesn't look like you're doing the work. You're just talking and talking. There's a saying, talk is cheap and talk is cheap. You're doing the work while you talk about it. And I talk to my friends who have kids. And I just said, I don't have kids. It's not something I'm never going to say never because you never know. But I am genuinely interested in helping my friends if I can with their kids because I'm going through that journey and learning how important it is, the patterns you set when you're younger because of the work I'm doing on the backside. And that's a conversation you can have as well. And it's like, oh, well, what do we relate to? I don't have kids. You don't have kids. We don't relate. It's bullshit. It's actually bullshit.
Yeah.
You actually have a different viewpoint that could be incredible because when you have kids, you can kind of be blinded as well, right?
Yeah.
My kid's the greatest. My kid's the best sports. He's the best at math. Or, we do, I'm acting like this in front of my wife or in front of my husband. And I'm like, just so you know, my parents did this. And when you think they can't feel it, even if you're not saying it out loud, that energy field, trust me, they felt it or they feel it. So it's this cognizant behavior, and even Lane brings that up, or this idea that like we can learn from our past, share it with other people, and we're doing it in a way that is non-judgmental at all. It is zero judgment because the fact is we're actually in the same place. We're just aware of it and open to sharing.
Yeah. No, I think you're putting it excellently. I think, vulnerability, right? And that's how a lot of times people open up to each other, right? And you could go and meet someone and it's like, I'm doing this and I'm doing this and and it's like, great, great. Or I am doing this, but guess what? This is also what I'm working on. I am not perfect, right? And sometimes in the conversations, you almost feel like everyone's just giving their highlight reel, right? Or whether it's the day or the week. And it's like, yeah, it was this. And again, if we talk about the year in podcasts, and even what I've learned is, in order to have great days, you have to have bad days, right? Then you really appreciate those great days. But there's a vulnerability to that, right? And that's, I think, not lying to yourself, right? And saying,
Well,
this was a certain occurrence.
I think and I think I'm going to leave it with this because I'm hearing it and seeing it so much. And I think people do is people will say and ask you, what do you do? We've had our parents on this podcast and they're 80 years old. And it's such an interesting question. And now I don't want to make someone feel awkward, but it's almost like, what do I do? Meaning like, what do I do in the morning? What do I do as a friend? What do I do as a brother? Or are you saying, what do I do in terms of my work? Am I defined by my work? Because that's a lot of the times they're asking, what do you do for work? It's like, I'm a real estate agent. That's not what I do. It's not who I am. And as I look at our parents, it's like, our dad, what'd you do? You raised 4 incredible kids. You now have a loving relationship with your wife. You love your dog more than life itself right now. You're the happiest person in the room, right? Go to my mom. Again, you helped raise 4 kids. You love your family more than anything. You've been a patron of culture. You speak 5 languages. You love arts. You hold yourself in great regard with the way you look every day. You genuinely care, as I said, so much about family, and there's
You're
love.
gonna make
and
me
light.
look bad if I don't say anything nice about them too.
But let's stop defining ourselves by that, right? Like, what was this year about? I sold some real estate. I'll tell you that. But this year was not defined by my real estate sales. And I could argue the same about you. And I think that's a great year in reflection. And as we push forward and the way we look at each other, right? We're not business partners, right? We'll never be just business partners. We are twins. We support each other. We love each other. We fight. We poke. We make up. We want to see the best in each other. And again, that's as I sit across from you. But that's how you're defined. That's who you are. That's what you do.
Yeah, and again, I got a tattoo this year that is a symbol of awareness to me, which is just to keep on growing. And I think when I first went through it, and I said on the podcast, is at first I was waiting for this monumental thing to happen to change. I remember I got to 100 days and I go,
100 days of being so
yeah,
sober.
or yeah, and just being back in Dallas. And I was like, I felt like I get to the 100 mark and it's like, I'm going to feel great, right? Like that's a mark of, and I didn't. And someone said to me, it's not the amount of days, it's the quality days. Um, and so my awareness is that it was a bunch of little things that amounted to a big thing. And now that I'm at this spot, it's still ingrained in my mind. It's the little things each day. Sometimes you don't even know it. Sometimes you do, that make it great. And as you go and I look at this year, huge transformation. As I look to next year, I want to build on that, right? And it's not building on it by saying, okay, I'm going to do this one thing and this. Obviously, I'll have goals and things, but it's going to be just my mindset every day or how I look at relationships. Or as you just said, someone says, what do you do, right? Or how are you doing, right? So often we see someone, especially around the holidays, and you're like, how are you doing? And it's like, good, great. It's as vague as a question as you can ask, and it's as vague as an answer, right? And and I've gotten a little bit better, and I think it actually has improved relationships of saying, you know, how are you doing? But really tell me how you're doing, right? Tell me what the good and the bad, right? Or where you're at. And it's amazing how, for me at least, where I want to build on some of the relationships I call it failed on or just became self-absorbed or in my own world, where it's like it's not a huge thing to ask or go through, but it opens so many more doors to be like, okay, I really care, right? And I don't
Yeah.
think you can ever fake caring.
Yeah, and what you said was awareness. And so to be aware as we go into the holidays and we're with family and friends is just be aware. Be aware of people in the room that are the light. Be aware of people that may have some darkness or sadness in them. And if you care, just have the mindfulness to ask some questions, to maybe be soft where you need to be soft and hard where you need to be hard. You know, a great example of this is and someone gave me this idea and this thought process is, for the longest part I worried about you. Like I worried about your health, your relationships, where you stood. And I think what I was doing is when I was interacting with you or talking to you or picking up the phone in the morning, I was sending you what I would call a worry rock, right? And I was handing you that worry rock. And if you have a worry rock, the last thing you want is a worry rock. Like, get this thing away from me, right? I don't want this. And someone said to me, they said, okay, how about you hand him a trust rock? I trust you'll make right decisions. I trust that you're concerned about your health now. I trust that you'll choose good relationships and set good boundaries. Um, I trust that you're going to have ups and downs, but I'm not going to be on top of you and micromanaging you. I trust that you can not answer my phone call and be okay. And he's like, I think he will hold on to that trust rock better and he will respond better and your relationship will be stronger for that. And wow, it's been only 2 months, but I hope you feel the difference between the trust and the worry.
Yeah, 100%. I think again, we have so many different conversations. I remember a conversation we said is, how do we start a conversation off with just good news, right? As opposed to here's my stress or that stress. And it's almost like positive and negative, right? If you start something off negative, right? Where's the conversation? Or how, like you said, how are you going to feel? As opposed to positive. Trust is a big positive word, right? Stress is it's
Well,
not
it's
a
as simple
positive.
as me calling saying, "Brother, I've got great news." And it's like, whoa, it's not the greatest of news ever, but it just
And it might be the
sets
greatest news to you, but it still builds
it
on,
sets this
yeah.
this thing in your heart that you're like, ah,
Well, now I can share back good news with you, right? Or vice
yeah,
versa. Or like, okay, I
yeah.
want to find my good news for the day or for the week. Yeah. So again, and that was so far off, right? Like if we go back to, I can't remember my first podcast with you. I think it was in February or March. Um, and that even the conversations we're having now we're so far away, right? And now it's, yeah, we can talk about so many different things as well as there's no judgment or there's no feel like there's going to be judgment, which is cool. And I think even the little things, I got a tattoo and I said, when are you going to get your tattoo? And I just got flashed by it a little bit just now. I think you should show it to the viewers, but it's like, it's nice to continue opening up and then have someone next to you opening up with you, right? And I say that's not competitive, but it's a good, like, let's keep going
Yeah, and
together.
I will
And
tell
so
you,
that's the nice
it's
part.
the little, you just said it, it's the little things. When I was talking about it, it wasn't like I'm gonna upstage you and what you got. It was genuine. I love that. That's cool. And I felt the authenticity in your voice by it. Whereas before you could like, oh, why'd you get that? Oh, what are you looking for? Oh, you need the attention. And that wasn't my intention, as you knew, but you also made me feel good about that. And for the audience listening, you could say, well, that sounds rather odd that a brother wouldn't be encouraging. But anyone who's got a brother or sister or competitor or someone that you think's in their corner but kind of isn't, there's always this subconscious competition, whether it's looks, wealth, status. And what I'm saying right now is give it all away.
Yeah.
It's bullshit.
Or even impressed, right? I got impressed as you go into the holidays. I got impressed with the best Thanksgiving dinner, the
The nicest,
table, or
pulling up to the
this.
nicest car,
Yeah,
giving the nicest gift.
yeah,
At the end of the day, I think we can both say this through a year of growth, it's the love that you show.
1000% agree. 1000, and that's my biggest transformation. I remember when, again, I did my 3 things, and I said confidence, attractive, content, and you did yours, and one was love, and you said before that, I I would never have guessed that, and now it's like, no, I can easily see it, and I could see it in me too, where before it was so foreign, where it's like love is such a powerful word in so many different senses, and I don't think I'll be on this podcast before the end of the year, but I would say, thank you to family, friends, coworkers that gave me the love, right? And didn't have to, or could have said, this is your journey, but they were all supportive.
We are going to donate to a charity of your choice because even though you are our longest standing guest, we still keep the charity donation each time you go on here. So I'd like to know which charity of your choice would you like to donate to?
I'm going to be honest when not that I wouldn't be honest, but when my mom said that she wanted to donate to the Basset Hounds charity, it made me feel so good. I have a Basset Hound named Waffle, who's my son, my roommate, my confidant. But it's amazing. I got to see firsthand when my parents adopted 2 Bassets that one had one eye. I can't remember the other one.
The other one lost both his eyes. So we
Yeah.
had 2 Bassets, one eye.
2 Bassets, and they couldn't have been happier. And thank God they were adopted. So I'd like to back that up with another $2,500 to the Basset Hound Association.
Yeah, the Arizona Basset Hound Foundation got Christmas this year.
As they deserve it, right? As they deserve it.
That's my joy.
Thank you, bro.
We love the Bassets.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah. And I think that's
And you especially, brother.
Thank you. I think that's an incredible place to stop, but I feel the emotion in your eyes. But it's real, it's raw, it's everything that the Alex Perry on Fire podcast is about. And I look forward to having you on again as our most seasoned and one of my, if not my favorite guests. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Alex Perry on Fire. It means so much to me and the wonderful team that makes this all possible. I'm now passing the flame to you. Please follow, like, and subscribe so you can always stay up to date. Thanks again, and stay fired up.